The Great Lawgivers, How the Iroquois Confederacy Shaped American Democracy. What if I told you that one of the most powerful democracies in human history was never born in Athens or Rome, but in the forests and valleys of what we now call New York State? What if I told you that centuries before the Founding Fathers argued about checks and balances, a group of indigenous nations had already solved those problems, and that their solution directly influenced the United States Constitution? Welcome to Global Sovereign University. Today, we're stepping back in time to explore a story that has been overlooked, underestimated, and sometimes erased from the history books. This is the story of the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, and the extraordinary document that held them together, the Great Law of Peace, the land and its people. Picture the northeastern woodlands, Lake Ontario to the north, the Finger Lakes stretching through rolling hills, the Adirondack Mountains rising to the east, rivers everywhere, highways of water connecting people, carrying trade, feeding communities. 5 nations lived in this territory: the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca. Each had its own identity, its own traditions, its own leadership. And for a long time, these nations were at war with one another. Cycles of revenge, blood feuds, raids that left families shattered and villages burned. Then someone had a different idea. His name was Dekanawida, and history remembers him as the Great Peacemaker. Born in a time of relentless violence, he experienced a vision that changed everything. A vision of nations living side by side, governed not by force, but by consensus, respect, and shared responsibility. But a vision means nothing without a voice. Dekanawida found that voice in Hiawatha, a man broken by personal tragedy, consumed by grief after losing his family to the very conflicts Dekanawida sought to end. When these two men met, something extraordinary happened. Hiawatha's pain became purpose. Together, they traveled village to village, council fire to council fire, making the case for unity. It wasn't easy. Tribal leaders feared losing their autonomy. Warriors distrusted the idea of peace. But Dekanawida and Hiawatha persisted, and eventually they succeeded. What emerged was the Great Law of Peace, the Iroquois. This was not a simple truce. It was a comprehensive system of governance built on principles that still resonate today. Consensus decision-making. No leader could act alone. Every voice in the council mattered. Decisions required broad agreement, not a simple majority. Separation of powers. Military leaders were kept separate from civil leaders. War chiefs could not also be peacetime chiefs. Sound familiar? Women in governance. Clan mothers, the matriarchs of each clan, held the power to nominate and remove chiefs. In a world where most civilizations excluded women from power entirely, the Haudenosaunee placed them at the center of political life. And here's the symbol that captures it all: the Tree of Peace, a great white pine under which the 5 nations buried their weapons. Its roots stretched in 4 directions, inviting all who wished to follow the path of peace. An eagle sat atop the tree, watching for threats to the alliance. Now here's where this story connects directly to every American alive today. Benjamin Franklin studied the Iroquois Confederacy. At the Albany Congress of 1754, he explicitly referenced their system as a model. His argument was simple. If these nations could unite under a common government while preserving their individual identities, why couldn't the colonies do the same? The echoes are everywhere in our founding documents. Federalism, a central government with states retaining their own authority. Checks and balances, consensus building, the inclusion of diverse voices. The Haudenosaunee didn't just predate American democracy, they helped inspire it. But this isn't just a history lesson. The Haudenosaunee nations are alive today. They are revitalizing their languages, preserving their ceremonies, and asserting their sovereignty. The Great Law of Peace is not a museum artifact. It's a living document that continues to guide governance and cultural identity. And the lessons it teaches, that strength comes from unity, that governance should serve the people, that women must have a seat at the table, that peace requires active commitment. Those lessons have never been more relevant than they are right now. The Great Lawgivers is available now through Global Sovereign University, part of our mission to build a bridge to freedom through education, not handouts. This is one of over 120 books Dr. Jean Constant has donated to the foundation, and every one of them is designed to help you think critically, learn deeply, and build the life you deserve. Visit globalsovereignuniversity.org. Play the book games. Meet Gino, your AI tutor. And remember, the greatest civilizations were built not by conquerors, but by lawgivers. The book is available on Amazon.com. In the search bar, type ASIN B0FQ6NOIGK. Thank you for listening. Buzzsprout episode description. Target 3,500 characters. Centuries before the Declaration of Independence, 5 indigenous nations in present-day New York State created one of the most sophisticated democratic governments the world has ever seen. The Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, united the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca under a single governing framework called the Great Law of Peace. Their system featured consensus-based decision-making, separation of military and civil authority, and the radical inclusion of women as political leaders with the power to nominate and remove chiefs. In this episode, Dr. Jean A. Constant explores the origins, principles, and lasting influence of the Iroquois Confederacy, as detailed in his book, The Great Lawgivers. The story begins with the Great Peacemaker, Dekanawida, who experienced a transformative vision of nations united in peace rather than torn apart by war. Together with Hiawatha, an orator whose personal tragedy fueled a lifelong commitment to reconciliation, Dekanawida traveled among the warring tribes, making the case for a new way of governing. The Great Law of Peace that emerged was not a simple peace treaty. It was a comprehensive constitutional framework that established councils of chiefs, defined the rights and responsibilities of leaders, and created mechanisms for resolving disputes through dialogue rather than violence. The law was symbolized by the Tree of Peace, a great white pine under which the nations buried their weapons, with an eagle perched at the top to watch for approaching danger. Dr. Constant traces the direct lines of influence from the Haudenosaunee system to the founding of the United States. Benjamin Franklin studied the Iroquois model and referenced it at the Albany Congress of 1754. The principles of federalism, checks and balances, and representative government that Americans take for granted today have deep roots in Indigenous governance. The book examines each of the original 5 nations, the Mohawk as keepers of the Eastern Door, the Seneca as keepers of the Western Door, the Onondaga as central fire keepers, and later the Tuscarora, who joined as the 6th nation. It explores the matrilineal social structures that gave women central authority, the spiritual traditions woven into governance, and the devastating impact of European colonialism on these nations. Individual chapters are dedicated to each of the 6 nations, tracing their unique contributions to the alliance. The Mohawk chapter explores their role as fierce protectors and skilled diplomats on the eastern frontier. The Onondaga chapter reveals how the Fire Keepers maintained spiritual and political balance at the center of the Confederacy. The Seneca chapter examines the largest nation's military prowess and deep spiritual traditions as keepers of the Western Door. But this is not only a story of what was lost. The Great Lawgivers also documents the revival and renewal of Haudenosaunee culture, language, and political sovereignty in the modern era. Today, language immersion programs, cultural festivals, and sovereignty movements are restoring the living traditions of the Confederacy. The lessons of the Great Law of Peace, that strength comes from unity, that governance must serve all people, that women must hold positions of authority, and that peace requires active daily commitment, remain urgently relevant in our fractured modern world. The Great Lawgivers is published through Global Sovereign University, a 501c3 educational nonprofit dedicated to building a bridge to freedom through education, not handouts. Dr. Jean A. Constant has donated over 120 books to the foundation, each designed to equip learners with the knowledge and critical thinking skills to build sovereign, self-directed lives. Visit globalsovereignuniversity.org to access free learning resources, interactive book games, and Gino, your AI tutor. Keyword phrases, character limit, 500 characters, comma-separated Iroquois Confederacy, Haudenosaunee, Great Law of Peace, Dekanawida, Hiawatha, 5 nations, Indigenous governance, Native American democracy, Founding Fathers' influence, Mohawk Nation, Seneca Nation, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, Tuscarora, Tree of Peace, Consensus Government, Matrilineal Society, Clan Mothers, American democracy origins, Indigenous history, Tribal sovereignty, Dr. Jean Constant, Global Sovereign University blog post. The Democracy That Came Before: How the Iroquois Confederacy Shaped America, by Dr. Jean A. Constant, Global Sovereign University, one-paragraph summary. The Great Lawgivers, by Dr. Jean A. Constant, reveals the extraordinary story of the Iroquois Confederacy, the Haudenosaunee, a sophisticated democratic alliance of indigenous nations that predated the United States Constitution by centuries. Through 20 chapters spanning the ancient landscapes of New York, the visionary leadership of Dekanawida and Hiawatha, the revolutionary Great Law of Peace, and the direct influence on Benjamin Franklin and the Founding Fathers, this book challenges readers to recognize that the roots of American democracy extend far deeper than Philadelphia in 1787, reaching back to the council fires of the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca nations. Article: Most Americans learn that democracy began in ancient Greece and was reborn in the American Revolution. That narrative is incomplete. Long before Thomas Jefferson put quill to parchment, a confederacy of indigenous nations in the northeastern woodlands had already built a functioning democratic government, one that would directly influence the framers of the United States Constitution. In The Great Lawgivers, Dr. Jean A. Constant traces the full arc of the Haudenosaunee story. It begins with the land itself, the fertile valleys of the Finger Lakes, the shores of Lake Ontario, the forests teeming with game, and the rivers that served as highways connecting communities. The Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca had lived in this territory for centuries, developing agriculture based on the three sisters, corn, beans, and squash, along with trade networks and complex social structures organized around matrilineal clans. But they were also at war with each other. Generations of blood feuds, raids, and revenge killings had created a cycle of destruction that threatened to consume all five nations. It was into this chaos that a man named Dekanawida, the Great Peacemaker, arrived with a radical proposition: stop fighting and build something together. Dekanawida's partner in this mission was Hiawatha, a gifted orator whose own family had been destroyed by the very conflicts they sought to end. Together, they traveled among the tribes, overcoming suspicion, hostility, and deeply entrenched rivalries. Their message was not naive idealism. It was strategic. United, the five nations would be stronger than any could be alone. Divided, they would eventually be consumed by outside forces, a prediction that proved tragically accurate with the arrival of European colonizers. The system they created, the Great Law of Peace, or Iroquois, was a masterpiece of political engineering. It established a grand council of 50 chiefs representing all five nations. Decisions were made by consensus, not majority vote. Military authority was separated from civil authority. And in what may be the most revolutionary feature of all, women served as the political foundation of the entire system. Clan mothers nominated and removed chiefs, ensuring that leadership remained accountable to the people. Dr. Constant dedicates individual chapters to each of the six nations. The Mohawks served as keepers of the eastern door, protecting the Confederacy from threats along its eastern frontier. The Seneca guarded the western door. The Onondaga, located at the geographic center, served as firekeepers and custodians of the Great Law itself. The Oneida and Cayuga each brought unique agricultural strength and diplomatic skill. And later, the Tuscarora joined as the sixth nation in the early 18th century, expanding the alliance's reach and resilience. The book's most provocative chapters examine the direct influence of the Iroquois system on the Founding Fathers. Benjamin Franklin attended treaty councils with the Haudenosaunee and explicitly invoked their model at the Albany Congress of 1754. The parallels between the Great Law of Peace and the U.S. Constitution, federalism, separation of powers, representative government, protection of individual rights within a collective framework, are too numerous and too specific to dismiss as coincidence. The Great Lawgivers does not shy away from the devastating impact of European colonization, the diseases that decimated populations, the wars that fractured alliances, the treaties broken and lands stolen. But it also documents the remarkable resilience of the Haudenosaunee people, who continue today to revitalize their languages, practice their spiritual traditions, and assert their sovereignty. For educators, students, and anyone who cares about the true origins of American governance, this book is essential reading. It is published through Global Sovereign University, a 501c3 educational nonprofit whose mission is to build a bridge to freedom through education, not handouts. Visit globalsovereignuniversity.org to access free learning resources, interactive book games, and Geno, your AI tutor. Because the greatest civilizations were built not by conquerors, but by lawgivers. Children's version, age 10. Reading level, 4th to 5th grade. Introduction. What is this book about? Imagine you live in a world where your neighbors are always fighting. Every family blames the other families for things that happened years ago. Nobody trusts anybody. People get hurt, and then their families want to hurt someone back, and it just keeps going and going. Now imagine that one person stands up and says, "What if we stopped? What if instead of fighting, we talked to each other? What if we created rules that were fair for everyone? Rules where every person's voice counted?" That's exactly what happened hundreds of years ago in what we now call New York State. 5 groups of Native American people: the Mohawk, the Oneida, the Onondaga, the Cayuga, and the Seneca were trapped in an endless cycle of war. Then 2 extraordinary leaders, Dekanawida and Hiawatha, convinced them to try something totally new: peace. The government they built together was called the Iroquois Confederacy, and the rules they followed were called the Great Law of Peace. And here's the really amazing part. Many of those same ideas were later used by the people who wrote the United States Constitution. This book tells their story, and it's one of the most important stories in all of American history. Comprehensive description. The Great Lawgivers takes you on a journey through the world of the Haudenosaunee. Say it, Haudenosaunee, which is what the Iroquois people call themselves. It means people of the longhouse because they lived in long wooden houses where many families shared one home, kind of like a really big apartment building. The book starts by describing the beautiful land where these people lived. Imagine huge forests full of deer, bears, and birds, crystal clear lakes surrounded by green hills, rivers that stretched for miles, used like highways for their canoes. The land was full of everything they needed: fish from the lakes, animals from the forests, and rich soil where they grew corn, beans, and squash, 3 crops they called the 3 sisters because they helped each other grow when planted together. But even though the land was beautiful, the people were at war. The 5 nations fought each other for years and years. Families lost loved ones. Villages were attacked. Everyone lived in fear. It seemed like the fighting would never stop. Then came a man named Dekanawida, who had a powerful vision, not a dream when you're sleeping, but a deep understanding of what the world could become. He believed that if the 5 nations stopped fighting and worked together, they would be stronger than they ever could be alone. But Dekanawida needed help spreading his message, and that's where Hiawatha came in. Hiawatha had lost his own family because of all the fighting, and he was filled with sadness. When he heard Dekanawida's message of peace, it changed his life. He became the greatest speaker the 5 nations had ever heard, and together he and Dekanawida walked from village to village, convincing people that peace was possible. The government they created was amazing. Each nation sent leaders to a grand council, a big meeting where everyone discussed problems together. Instead of one boss making all the decisions, they kept talking until everyone agreed. That's called consensus. If even one nation had a serious concern, they kept working on it until they found a solution that was fair for everybody. One of the coolest things about their system was the power of women. In the Iroquois Confederacy, the clan mothers were the ones who chose the chiefs. If a chief was doing a bad job, the clan mother could remove him and pick someone better. That meant leaders always had to listen to the people and do what was right. The symbol of their peace was a great white pine tree called the Tree of Peace. The 5 nations buried their weapons under this tree as a promise to stop all violence. An eagle sat on top of the tree, looking out in every direction for danger. The roots spread out to the north, south, east, and west, welcoming anyone in the world who wanted to follow the path of peace. Here's where the story connects to you. When the founding fathers of the United States were trying to figure out how to build a new country, they studied the Iroquois Confederacy. Benjamin Franklin said that if these Native American nations could work together in one government while keeping their own identities, the 13 colonies should be able to do the same thing. Many of the ideas in the U.S. Constitution, like having different branches of government, like making sure leaders are accountable to the people, like including many voices in big decisions, came from what the Haudenosaunee had already been doing for centuries. The book also tells the sad parts of the story. When European settlers arrived, they brought diseases that killed huge numbers of indigenous people. They also took land, broke promises, and tried to destroy the culture and traditions of the Haudenosaunee. But the spirit of the Iroquois Confederacy was never fully broken. Today, the Haudenosaunee nations are still here. They are teaching their languages to young people, holding their ceremonies, and reminding the world that the Great Law of Peace is not just history, it's a living guide for how people should treat each other. Chapter by chapter outline. Chapter 1. The Ancient Land. Explore the beautiful forests, lakes, rivers, and mountains where the Iroquois nations lived. Learn about the animals they hunted, the crops they grew, and why the land was so important to their way of life. Chapter 2. The Great Peacemaker. Meet Dekanawida, the man who had a vision of peace when everyone around him was fighting. Learn how he teamed up with Hiawatha to convince the 5 nations to stop their wars and build something better. The 5 nations unite, discover how the Mohawk, Oneida, Onondaga, Cayuga, and Seneca each decided to join the Confederacy, and what made each nation special and important. Chapter 4. The Great Law. Dive into the rules that held the Confederacy together. Learn about the Grand Council, how decisions were made, and why the Great Law of Peace was one of the most important documents ever created. Chapter 5. Consensus and Representation. Understand how every nation got a voice in government, and why the Iroquois believed that talking things out was always better than fighting. Chapter 6. Women's Roles and Responsibilities. Learn about the amazing clan mothers who chose the chiefs, made important decisions, and kept their communities strong. In the Iroquois system, women had more power than women almost anywhere else in the world. Chapter 7. Influencing the Founding Fathers. Find out how Benjamin Franklin and other leaders of the American colonies studied the Iroquois government and used its ideas to help build the United States. Chapter 8. A Model for Modern Governance. See how the ideas from the Great Law of Peace still show up in governments around the world today. Chapter 9. Cultural Exchange and Legacy. Explore how the Iroquois traded goods and ideas with their neighbors, and how their culture influenced the people around them. Chapter 10. Colonialism and Conflict. The arrival of Europeans changed everything. Learn about the wars, diseases, and broken treaties that threatened the Confederacy's survival. Chapter 11. Revival and Renewal. Even after centuries of hardship, the Haudenosaunee nations are rebuilding. Learn about the people working to save their languages, traditions, and political systems. Chapter 12. Lessons for the Future. What can the Great Law of Peace teach us about solving problems in our own world today? This chapter connects ancient wisdom to modern challenges. Chapter 13. The Mohawk Nation. Meet the keepers of the Eastern Door, fierce protectors of the Confederacy's eastern border, and skilled traders, warriors, and diplomats. Chapter 14. The Oneida Nation. Discover the people of the Standing Stone, known for their rich farmland, strong community bonds, and their important role in the American Revolution. Chapter 15. The Onondaga Nation. Learn about the Firekeepers, the nation at the heart of the Confederacy that kept the Central Council fire burning and guarded the Great Law. Chapter 16. The Cayuga Nation. Explore the Cayuga homeland along the beautiful Cayuga Lake, and learn about their contributions to the Alliance. Chapter 17. The Seneca Nation. Meet the keepers of the Western Door, the largest of the 5 nations, known for their military strength and their deep spiritual traditions. Chapter 18. The Tuscarora Edition. Learn how a 6th nation, the Tuscarora, fled conflict in the South and were welcomed into the Confederacy in the early 1700s. Chapter 19. Spiritual Traditions and Beliefs. Discover the spiritual world of the Haudenosaunee, their ceremonies, their connection to nature, and their belief that all living things are connected. Chapter 20. The Enduring Spirit of the Iroquois. The final chapter celebrates the strength and resilience of the Haudenosaunee people, whose culture and government continue to inspire the world.